My name is Jayson Antonoff, and I'm with the Institute for Market Transformation, and as was mentioned, that is the U.S. hub for the Global Building Performance Network. And I think you're going to hear a lot of common themes today from the panelists. There certainly are a lot of the same types of issues that we're working on within GBPN. And for me, it really comes from sort of a personal space. I actually was fortunate enough to live in Denmark about 10 years ago, spent a year there. And it gave me a chance to really see and understand the fact that there are different ways that we can construct buildings, that we can develop cities, even different lifestyles that don't necessarily mean that we're moving in a negative direction. It's a different direction. And this idea of being exposed to new ways of doing things, to think outside of the way that it's traditionally done in the U.S., goes far beyond just thinking about forced air ventilation, but lots of other things that we could be doing differently if we just knew that there were possibilities out there. So this idea of being exposed to best practices around the world and then making appropriate choices that relate to our culture, our economy, our training that we have within our building professions, things like that, we see enormous potential in just having that sort of exposure and sharing that understanding of best practices throughout the world. So with that being said, the mission of the Global Building Performance Network, as was mentioned in the introduction, is to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with building energy use. And we intend to do that by harvesting these best practices around the world, going out, seeking best practices wherever they exist, documenting them, researching them, providing authoritative data on what is working, why is it working, and how can that be applied here within the U.S. And then taking that information and really sharing it with the appropriate senior level policymakers and business leaders so that we can take action and implement things at a local level here. We believe as an organization that we have a very serious issue with climate change, with carbon impacts, and that the way that we're doing things right now, business as usual, simply is not moving the bar quickly enough. That we have to find ways to, again, glean these best practices, accelerate the rate of change, find ways to effectively, cost-effectively, and culturally sensitive ways to really transform policies and markets here in this country. We have the ability to do that. We're not talking about any silver bullets. We're waiting for some new whiz-bang technologies. There are lots of great things that are being done, both in this country and around the world. Our goal is to figure out how to take the best practices of today and really make those standard practice so that every building today is built to the best possible standards that we know are already available to us, the best technologies, and the best ways of really moving forward. The way that GBPN itself is organized is we are a global best practice network. We have a research global center in Paris, and then we have regional hubs in India, in China, in the EU, and then here within the United States, the Institute for Market Transformation here in DC is the regional representative, the regional hub for GBPN. And by having those 4 regional offices, we have the ability to really regionalize the information. We can take information that's being produced at the global level by sharing all of our expertise and our understanding of what's worked within our own region, share that, and then bring it back down to each of our regions, distill it, translate it, make sure that it's culturally sensitive and responsive to the specific needs. There are very different ways that we do things, for example, here in the United States than they might be done in China, for example. But that doesn't mean that we can't take some of the policy, some of the things that they've learned there, and figure out the right way to take pieces of that and apply it here in this country. So that's really the intent of the GBPN, is to take that global understanding of what is working in other regions and figure out how can we make that work effectively here in this country as well. We're a fairly new organization. GBPN has been around for a couple of years in the formation stages, but really has just gotten its legs this year. I actually joined the organization 3 months ago, so I'm still acclimated to the Washington summers and everything else here. We've hired some of our other executive staff or brought them fully on board in the last few months as well. So you probably haven't heard much about us yet, but I think we're going to be gathering a lot of momentum and really trying to push the dialogue, the conversations about best practices at a global level by working with other NGOs, with government officials, with the private sector as well, bringing all the right audiences together, and not necessarily advocating for change, but making sure that people understand what the possibilities are, what has been working, what things they should be thinking about as they're developing their appropriate business practices and energy policies moving forward. We've commissioned a couple of reports that were published just this past summer, about 6 weeks ago now. The first one was a report that was done by the Central European University out of Budapest, and the goal of that report was to really assess at a global level what is the potential for energy efficiency improvements. If we, again, don't find any silver bullets, but just take the best practices that we have today and fully implement them the way they could be implemented, and then continue to make some reasonable improvements in our energy codes and other policies like that, what is achievable? How much can we actually turn the dial? How much can we bend the curve? Because right now, business as usual, we're going to see continued growth around the world in energy consumption and carbon impacts. We have to be able to turn that curve downward. The results of that study showed that within the United States and the EU, we believe that by the year 2050, we can reduce energy consumption by 60% compared to what we use today. So that's with the continued growth of our housing stocks and new construction and everything, we can still hit those kinds of targets. Now, it's a little bit easier and harder, I guess depends how you look at it, because we're not looking at a lot of population growth. We're not going to have a tremendous amount of new construction. We're focused much more in this country and in Europe on what can we do with existing buildings. How can we really begin to get to deep retrofits where we're reducing energy consumption of buildings by not 10, 20, 30% like we're doing now in typical retrofits, but how do we get to 60, 70, 80% reductions in buildings? It's a big challenge, but we think there are ways to get there. Just for context, one of the other outcomes of that study was when we looked at the other regions, we found that in China, there'll be obviously a lot of new construction happening there, but they have advantages in the way their government is structured, advantages from a point of view of implementing policies. There are some disadvantages associated with that. But they can move quickly when they make a decision on something. And because of that, and because of some of the things that are happening there, we believe that even with the rapid growth in increased building stock in China, we can hold the line. We can actually maintain steady energy consumption within the building sector in China and still accommodate all of the increase in construction. India, on the other hand, much more fragmented economy, also very rapid growth anticipated there. Our findings were that we'll consider it to be a win if India only doubles its energy consumption by the year 2050. So just to give you some global context, India really is going to be one of the big challenges we have to deal with. So I'm not sure how effective passive house construction, other techniques like that are in India, but whatever ideas we can come up with, that's going to be a really critical market from a global perspective. Another report that we completed this summer was one commissioned by LBNL, Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and the goal of that one was to look at what are the policy packages that we have right now at a global level. What are the best practices that are out there? Are they actually achieving results? And the outcome from that report was that, yes, there are some great ideas out there, not enough yet. We need to continue pushing the bar, or at least make sure that those best ideas that we have really get disseminated much more broadly and implemented effectively. And that the real solution is going to require no single strategy. It's really going to be a comprehensive toolkit, a package of policy reforms that really address all the different market sectors that we have, all the different types of buildings. You have to package that together and again understand the local needs, the local conditions of each and every jurisdiction and state that we're talking to in the United States. It's going to have to be a combination of lots of carrots to really pull the market forward, get the early adopters on board with different types of incentives and voluntary measures, and inevitably some mandatory measures as well to make sure that we're raising the floor and that all buildings have to achieve a certain minimum level performance that is continually increasing over time and moving us toward ultimately a zero net energy profile. There are several areas that were pointed out in that report and that IMT and the Global Building Performance Network are working on right now. So let me just go through a list of some of the things that we think are really important at a broad level. First one is policies that encourage greater transparency and awareness about how much energy buildings use. Right now, people know a lot more about the mileage their car gets than the performance of the buildings that they live in and that they work in. Europe, for example, has widespread building labeling requirements, the European Building Directive. Here in the United States, we have some programs for building rating and disclosure that are beginning to gain momentum. Currently, there are 6 cities in the country and a couple of states that have implemented mandatory requirements so that you can actually find out how this building or the commercial building that you work in compares to other buildings within that market sector. It's even gotten to the point where in Europe, for example, there are some apps that are developed, iPhone apps. You can walk up to a building, hold it up in front of you, and it'll show you the energy performance of that building. And turn it this way and see what the performance of that building is. What that means is that as a building owner or as a tenant, you now have transparency about the information and ultimately the costs of energy associated with the building. So you can use that to inform your decisions on where do I want to rent, what buildings do I want to buy, what impact is energy efficiency going to have on the bottom line for me. And we're hoping that that encourages people to make appropriate investments in energy efficiency, ultimately creating all the jobs associated with that and increasing the value of buildings that do perform well.